Billionaire finds a ragged teenage boy singing to his blind daughter on a frozen December night. A thin, shivering stranger slipped past armed security and layered gates, not to steal silver or beg for scraps, but to comfort a little girl who could no longer see Christmas lights. What happened next would shock the untouchable billionaire, awaken his silent daughter, and rewrite all three of their destinies forever. Cullen Jefferson was the man every headline called unbreakable, the youngest self-made billionaire in the country, the mind that turned steel and code into empires, the face magazines labeled the Ice King with the Midas touch. Yet behind the bulletproof windows of his mountain estate, he was a father bleeding out in slow motion. 1 year ago, on a snow-slick Christmas Eve, his wife lost control of the car. Cullen walked away. His wife did not. And their only daughter, Isabella, woke up to permanent darkness. Since then he had flown in retinal specialists from Switzerland, stem cell pioneers from Singapore, experimental surgeons from Boston. Millions vanished into private jets and sterile hope, but nothing brought back her sight or her smile. Isabella, once a whirlwind of laughter and questions, now sat in silence, eating only when coaxed, speaking only in whispers, retreating further every day into a world no one could reach. On a bitter December evening just days before Christmas, with snow muffling the entire estate, Isabella asked to be left alone by the frozen garden fountain, the one place the wind still spoke to her. Cullen granted the small wish, then stood at the window watching her tiny silhouette against the white, his heart a fist of guilt and useless money. That was the moment a fragile, trembling voice rose through the falling snow, a voice he had never heard before, singing an old Christmas lullaby no security system had announced. Cullen Jefferson had grown accustomed to the illusion of invincibility. For years it had wrapped around him like a tailored suit, precise and unbreakable. Investors admired him, newspapers praised him, and competitors feared him. People claimed he never lost, never faltered, never cracked. They believed he lived inside a world polished with success, untouched by the storms that shattered ordinary lives. But the truth hid in the quiet corners of his estate. It lived in the long corridors where light stayed dim even during the day. It hid beneath the heavy stone arches and behind closed doors that still held the scent of his late wife's perfume. It lay folded in the cold sheets of the bed he now slept in alone. It pressed against him whenever he looked at the small figure sitting silently near the garden fountain. His daughter, Isabella, was the truth he could never escape, and the ache that no achievement could numb. The accident had changed everything. The memory struck him in flashes, uninvited and merciless. The screech of tires skidding on black ice. His wife's hands gripping the wheel. Isabella's frightened cry. The world flipping, then collapsing into metal and snow. He remembered crawling out, blood freezing on his skin, breath fogging in the cold air. He remembered dragging Isabella from the wreckage, screaming her name while his wife lay still beside him. Later came the sterile hospital rooms and the words that crushed him. Permanent. Irreversible. Blindness likely caused by trauma. After that night, the mansion transformed. It once hosted holiday gatherings that rang with laughter. It once glowed with warm golden lights that his wife placed on every banister. Isabella had once danced through the halls chasing their golden retriever while asking questions about everything she saw. Now it felt like a house that had forgotten how to breathe. No decorations. No music. No joy. Only silence that deepened with every passing week. Isabella changed more than the house did. At first she cried constantly, terrified of the darkness that never lifted. Cullen remembered holding her, whispering comforts while hiding his own fear. Over time the crying stopped, but not because she grew stronger. It stopped because she began to withdraw. Her voice shrank into murmurs. Her steps became hesitant. Her spirit dimmed. She rarely asked for toys, rarely smiled, rarely reached out. Instead she sat in long stillness, as if waiting for something no one could provide. Cullen had tried everything. He spent money with a desperation that surprised even him. He brought in international experts, therapists specialized in childhood trauma, and trainers meant to help her adjust to her new world. The house filled with medical jargon, equipment, treatment plans, and charts that promised improvement but delivered nothing. Every specialist left with kind apologies and polite regret. Every failed attempt carved another hollow in his chest. He had never felt poorer. Not when his companies dipped during market crashes. Not when he fought hostile takeovers. Not when people accused him of ruthlessness. Those moments had been challenges he knew how to conquer. But this was different. This was a battle he could not win no matter how many zeros he added to a check. On this particular December evening, the mountain air hung frozen, sharp enough to sting through gloves. Snow fell in soft sheets, blanketing the estate in white silence. Christmas lights glimmered faintly along the distant town below, flickering like tiny candles on a dark sea. Cullen's estate sat above everything, fortified with high walls, armed guards, motion sensors, and surveillance systems that hardly ever missed a shadow. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace contrasted harshly with the coldness that lived inside Cullen's chest. He watched Isabella from the library window. She sat beside the frozen garden fountain, her hands folded in her lap, her tiny boots resting on the edge of ice. The fountain had once been her favorite place. She used to splash water with her mother. Now she only listened to the wind sliding across its frozen surface. Cullen wanted to go to her. He wanted to kneel beside her and hold her hands. But she had asked for a moment alone, and he respected it. She rarely made requests these days. Her voice was small when she asked, but it held a quiet determination that reminded him of her mother. He stood there for several minutes, feeling helpless. Snowflakes gathered on Isabella's coat. She did not brush them away. She tilted her head slightly upward, as if listening for something he could not hear. Then something shifted. At first he thought it was the wind. The sound was faint, almost swallowed by the falling snow. But then the melody became clearer. A soft trembling voice drifted across the garden. It carried a tune that belonged to old Christmas lullabies, the kind his wife used to hum when Isabella was a baby. The voice was young, fragile, and raw with emotion, yet its tone held warmth that wrapped around the cold air. Cullen frowned and stepped closer to the window. No guard had reported anyone entering the grounds. No sensor had triggered. No gate had opened. He knew the estate's security better than anyone. No stranger should be inside those walls. Yet the voice continued. It grew stronger, still tender but no longer hidden beneath the wind. The song seemed to float through the snow like a fragile thread weaving hope into the night. Isabella's head turned slightly toward the sound. The sight made Cullen's breath catch. She had not reacted that quickly to anything in months. He moved away from the window, his heartbeat heavy and rapid. He walked through the hallway and pushed open the back door, letting cold air sting his face. Snowflakes clung to his coat as he stepped into the garden. The voice became clearer with every step he took. He followed it around the hedge that framed the fountain area. The singing came from the right side, near the old willow tree that bent under winter's weight. As he approached, he saw a shadow leaning forward, slender and shivering. Cullen's pulse tightened. He expected a thief or a runaway. He prepared himself for confrontation. Instead he found something he could never have predicted. A teenage boy stood beside Isabella. His clothes were worn, almost threadbare. His jacket was too thin for the cold, patched in places that showed how many winters it had survived. Snow had gathered on his hair and shoulders. His cheeks were red from the freezing air. His boots were torn at the seams. He looked like someone who had not slept indoors for a long time. Yet the boy did not notice Cullen approaching. His entire attention rested on Isabella. He kept his voice soft and steady as he sang the lullaby, his breath turning into faint clouds of mist with every note. Isabella sat perfectly still, her face slightly lifted toward him, as if trying to feel the song rather than hear it. The scene froze Cullen where he stood. The garden lights cast a faint glow on the boy, enough to reveal his trembling hands and the sincerity in his expression. The boy looked fragile, almost breakable, but his presence carried a strange gentleness that the cold night could not erase. It was as if his voice reached into the silence that had wrapped itself around Isabella for months. Cullen had seen acclaimed performers. He had attended concerts, galas, and charity events featuring world-famous talent. But this boy's voice, though imperfect and trembling, had something none of those professionals possessed. It had soul. It had warmth. It had a kind of hope that did not demand attention but offered comfort instead. For the first time in a year, Cullen saw Isabella's shoulders relax. For the first time in a year, she turned her face towards someone's presence with genuine curiosity. For the first time in a year, she seemed awake. Cullen's breath left him in a slow cloud of disbelief. A stranger had slipped past every layer of protection he had built. A boy who looked like he owned nothing had given his daughter something priceless. A simple song. A fragile melody. A moment of peace she had not felt since the accident. He took another step forward. The snow crunched beneath his boots. The boy stiffened. The song faltered. He looked up sharply, fear flickering in his eyes. That was the moment the night changed forever. Because Cullen Jefferson, the unbreakable billionaire, found a poor teenage boy standing beside his blind daughter, singing to her with a tenderness that money could not buy. And nothing in his world would ever be the same again. Colette paused on the edge of the drive and let the cold press against his face. Snow crusted the tips of his hair and the collar of his too-thin coat. For a moment he stayed very still, listening for a sound he knew would not come, the clatter of servants, the bark of guards, the chatter of luxury that marked the interior of a house like that. Instead the world offered only the whisper of falling snow and, far inside, a faint light behind drawn curtains. He had walked away from a room that smelled of warm tea and old books, from a little hand that had found his in the dark, and from a father whose eyes had softened in ways he had not expected. The small miracle in that room felt both impossibly fragile and impossibly real. He wrapped his hands into his coat as if to hide the soreness at his fingertips. The skin there had gone raw from wind and cold. The knuckles were chapped and a pale blue puckered the tips like seedlings under glass. Each breath made a small fog that drifted away and vanished. He ran his thumb across the seam of his worn sleeve, the fabric thinned where his palm rested, threadbare from repeated use. He had been a lively child once, running barefoot and shouting in the alleys, but the winter had carved hollows into him that no music could yet fill. Moonlight found his face and spelled out the pale fairness beneath the grime. He was younger than a man of such courage should appear. His cheeks retained the round softness of someone not yet fully grown into the lines of adulthood. His hair was light and tended to fall into his eyes the way a child's hair did after a day of play. Even so, there were shadows under those bright eyes, the marks of night spent shivering under bridges and upon park benches. Yet the eyes themselves, when they caught the lamplight, seemed to hold something that surprised him even as he watched himself depart, an unusual openness, a tenderness that had no business belonging to someone who had so often been taught to look away. In those eyes lived an instinctive compassion, and that was why he had stood on the fountain's rim and sung, though he had not planned to cross the boundary of the property into a stranger's house. He had not come for food, nor for coin, nor for warmth. Those necessities were daily battles, bitter and practical. When he sang it was because sound was the only thing he had that could be given away without strings. It was a small, simple offering, the kind of thing thieves rarely traded in. He had noticed a tiny figure by the frozen fountain, shoulders hunched against the white. The child had been so still she might have been part of the winter statue behind her, had not the wind teased the hem of her coat. He knew a lonely posture when he saw it. He knew despair in the curve of a mouth. He had been that lonely person more times than he could count. Old instinct told him something could be done that did not involve asking for anything in return. When he pressed his lips to a worn tune, it was only to try to stitch a thread of comfort back into the night. The song felt meager against the vast cold, but he sang with every breath anyway. His voice was small and uncertain at first, raw from the weather, but it carried where words alone could not. He sang because the melody softened the edges of grief. He sang because when he sang he could pretend that a kindness might travel farther than he could walk that night. That was all he meant to do. Isabella had listened. She had been so accustomed to colored lights and whispered goodnights that ordinary darkness felt like an endless ocean. She had sat by the frozen fountain because the sound of moving water, even when stilled by ice, had been a memory of when the world still made sense. When the voice came, fragile and trembling, her whole body responded like a plant turning to light. Her hands, small in their gloves, had gone slack at her sides. The tension in the set of her jaw had eased. It was not that the song fixed everything, the wound inside her would not close so easily. But for the first time in many months something like peace had brushed the hollow in her chest. She lifted her face, eyes cast upward though they could not find a star, and gave a smile that began slow and then widened as if a shutter had been opened, letting warmth touch her features. That smile was a thing of private triumph. It was small and cautious, like the first thaw after long frost, but it stunned whoever saw it into hope. Cullen had come because his daughter's presence by the fountain felt like a risk, but also because his curiosity was a restless thing. He had been the kind of man to survey danger and control variables. He had expected to find a prowler or perhaps a ragged stray curled for warmth. He had not expected to find a small stranger whose voice could reach where medicine and machines could not. When Cullen stepped forward, the boy turned as any startled person would, eyes wide and quick, like a deer that feels a hand it does not trust. There was a moment then that felt like a fulcrum. A distance of breath separated the three of them. The snow at the boy's boots had not yet melted into the stone, the air held a crystalline quality as if the world were suspended between two beats. Cullen's approach carried the weight of authority. He had been taught, by advertisers and boardrooms, to read intentions behind every face. He had been taught to see potential harm before it rippled into action. Yet the first thing that struck him was how the boy's face did not contain the feral desperation Cullen had rehearsed. Instead, the boy looked as if he had stepped out of a different life entirely, one that had learned compassion out of necessity rather than affluence. "Who are you?" Cullen asked, voice even and cool, the sort of voice that could quiet rooms. The boy straightened, though his shoulders were paper thin. He swallowed, breath smoking white, and then met Cullen's gaze without flinching. There was a steadiness to his look that was not bravado, it was something forged from survival and empathy. He gave his name simply and without the pretense of manufacture. His pronunciation was neat, like he had been taught to place words with care at some point. The name he chose was not meant to challenge, it was meant to be recognized as an offering. "I mean no harm," he said plainly. "I saw a little girl sitting by the fountain. She looked so lonely. I thought maybe if I sang, she would feel less alone." Cullen blinked, an involuntary motion. Sincerity, unadorned and without calculation, had a way of cutting straight through his defenses. He had not anticipated that the unknown person on his grounds would come with only music as an intention. It disturbed some tidy assumptions he kept about the world. Wealth had taught him to think in transactions and safeguards, to count motives against outcomes, to build barriers where trust might otherwise live. This boy refused the ledger. He offered something that could not be converted into capital, presence. Isabella's small hand, which had been tucked beneath her coat, came forward then. She reached out further than she had in months and laid her fingers against the stranger's palm. The gesture was unforced, a simple human map returning to its natural lines. The hand she touched was raw and cold but perfectly whole in the way that mattered. For a moment the three of them were held together by the smallest of truths, that kindness can be a bridge across divides larger than walls. Cullen watched that touch and felt something inside him recalibrate. The instincts that protected his fortune were not the same as the instincts that shielded his daughter. He found himself examining the boy's hands with a tenderness he rarely allowed himself to feel for another adult. The frost had left little white ridges at the base of his nails. The skin of his palms had tiny calluses from hard work. He noted the threadbare cuff where the boy had mended his own sleeve, the way he clasped his coat more tightly when the wind found a seam. These were small facts, and yet they formed a full portrait of a life Cullen had never been obliged to know. "Why did you come inside?" Cullen asked, not as an accusation but as an inquiry. His voice held a new softness. It had softened because his daughter's expression, revived by that smile, had made him vulnerable in the most private way. The boy's answer was immediate and simple. "Because she looked sad," he said. I sing. I thought it might help. Not for anything else. I just wanted to help. Cullen studied him then, his face narrowing not in judgment but in the active work of comprehension. The sincerity in the boy's posture, the absence of a furtive glance toward pockets or doors, the unadorned apology in his tone all pressed against the kernel of something Cullen had forgotten how to use, belief in human goodness that is optional, not transactional. There was a pause, and in that pause Cullen heard a part of himself he had kept shuttered open. He saw his daughter as she was in that moment, a girl who could no longer taste light in the way other children did and who nonetheless reached to another person simply because that person had given her a thread of warmth. The thought of slamming his doors and mobilizing defenses felt suddenly monstrous. He could imagine the headlines if he chose anger, the legal precision if he called the guards, the polished rationale that would protect his reputation. He could also imagine, with a clarity that surprised him, his daughter retreating into the shell she had kept for months if he turned the boy away. "Do you have a place to go?" he asked finally. The boy's shoulders tightened, and something like a private shame or simple truth crossed his face. He looked at the frozen ground as if to count his belongings in snowflakes. "I have where I sleep sometimes," he said. "But sometimes there is no shelter. I do not want anything from you, sir. I only want to sing when I can." Cullen listened and then, because decisions in him were finally no longer only about balance sheets and quarterly returns, he surprised even himself. "You may come back tomorrow," he said. "We will find something warm for you to wear, and a hot meal. You will sing, and you will be permitted to be here. For now go home. Do not wander on the road tonight." The boy's face cleared like the sky after storm. Gratitude, fierce and immediate, lit his features. He bowed his head slightly, the motion of someone who knows the value of mercy when it is granted. Isabella squeezed his hand once, as if to press the permission into his bones. The touch sealed the permission in a way that formal words would not have done. He staggered a step back into the darker wash of the gate path. On the edge of the property he turned once, not fully expecting a reply, and then raised his chin to the mansion as if taking a last photograph in memory. The wind bit at his cheeks, his fingers felt like they were being bit too. He wrapped his coat tighter and started down the lane. Every step away carried the echo of the room behind him, the smell of tea, the warmth of a fire, a child's quiet laugh reborn like a bird testing a wing. He wondered, with a mix of disbelief and a new fragile hope, whether the invitation would hold in the light of morning. He was used to promises that melted like early frost. He had seen too many doors close at the sound of his footsteps. But for the first time in a long time he felt the resiliency of hope press against the margin of his heart. He walked on, listening to his own breath and the distant chiming of the estate clocks, hoping that morning would find him welcome and that the lullaby he had given would be given back in brighter form. The wind pushed softly at Colette's back as he made his way down the quiet mountain road. The cold nipped at his thin coat, but beneath the chill was something warmer, a memory still glowing from the estate behind him. Isabella's laughter, faint but real, continued to echo in the corner of his mind like a lantern refusing to dim. He clung to that sound as he walked. It had been so long since laughter felt close enough to touch. Yet as he turned onto the narrow street that led toward abandoned sheds and forgotten buildings, the warmth faded into uncertainty. His steps slowed. Night hardened around him, and the doubts returned the way they always did. People rarely meant kindness twice. A welcome spoken in the dark had a way of dissolving by sunrise. He had learned this early, back when promises were things made by desperate adults who thought children would not understand when they were broken. He found his resting place, a loose cluster of wooden pallets arranged behind a derelict shed. It gave him shelter from the worst of the wind, though frost still crept through the cracks. He curled into his coat, rested his head against his arm, and closed his eyes. The memory of Isabella's hand in his lingered, and as exhaustion pulled him downward, that small, fragile connection softened the edge of the night. When morning came, pale and unkind, he rose with a shiver and rubbed warmth into his fingers. The skin burned at his touch, raw from days of cold. He flexed them once, twice, then tucked them close to his chest. He wished he had gloves. He wished he had a thicker coat. But wishes were easy things, and easy things rarely changed his circumstances. He began walking toward the estate long before the sun had lifted fully above the ridge. Every step held hesitation. The closer he came, the slower he moved. When the outer gate appeared in the distance, he stopped completely. What if Cullen's kindness had been a momentary mercy, given only because the night had been still and the girl had smiled? What if he had misunderstood everything? He took a breath that clouded in front of him. He turned back once, thinking perhaps he should leave before embarrassment struck him silent. But then he remembered Isabella's quiet voice saying his name as though it were a small treasure. He remembered the shape of her smile as he sang. That memory gave him courage. He stepped through the open section of the gate, heart pounding with a rhythm so loud he imagined even the snow could hear it. His boots sank into the powder. The mansion loomed ahead, tall and bright against the winter sky, so far from the places he usually walked that he felt like he had wandered into a different world. He approached slowly, almost timidly, expecting a guard to appear. None did. Instead he reached the garden path and saw movement near the window. A small figure. A familiar one. Isabella, wrapped in a soft winter coat and wearing a knitted scarf someone had tied with gentle, careful hands, stood just behind the glass. Her face was turned upward, her head tilted as though she were listening to something far away. Then the moment his boots crunched the snow, she lifted her chin in his direction. Even though she could not see him, she recognized the sound of him arriving. A light bloomed across her face, warm and bright, and she pressed one hand to the glass as if reaching for him. Colette froze. He was afraid to breathe, afraid the magic would vanish if he moved. But when she smiled, full, unguarded, nothing like the cautious expressions from the night before, his nerves melted into something steady and resolute. She remembered him. She wanted him there. He took the last steps forward, and as he reached the veranda door, it opened before he could knock. A maid stood there with a soft expression, not surprised, not suspicious. Only welcoming. She gestured for him to come inside. Mr. Jefferson is in the study, she said quietly. Miss Isabella is waiting for you. His pulse kicked again. He stepped over the threshold, and warmth enveloped him immediately. The quiet luxury of the mansion felt overwhelming, but he kept his head down, breathing through his nerves. Isabella's small footsteps tapped lightly on the wooden floor. Then she appeared from the hallway, face bright with an excitement she did not bother to hide. Colette, she said in a whisper that trembled with joy. You came back. The simplicity of the words pierced him. No one said things like that to him. No one waited for him. He smiled, shy and unsure. I said I would try to come. I am glad I could. She reached toward the sound of his voice, hands searching. He stepped close enough for her to find him, and her fingers brushed the fabric of his sleeve before settling gently there, holding on with trust that felt sacred. Cullen appeared behind her, his expression unreadable at first. He observed the scene with a stillness that made Colette straighten unconsciously. You came, Cullen said. His tone was neither cold nor warm, just steady. Colette nodded quickly, head down. Only if it was still allowed, he answered. I did not want to assume. Cullen's gaze held him for a moment longer, weighing intentions, reading the silent language of posture and honesty. Finally he gave a small nod. It is allowed. Those 3 words eased a tight knot in Colette's chest he hadn't realized had formed overnight. Cullen crossed his arms, leaning a shoulder against the doorframe, watching the 2 children. He did not interrupt. He simply observed, noticing every detail. Isabella's posture, normally tense, had softened, her fingers no longer trembled with hesitation. The air around her seemed different, brighter in subtle ways. Cullen didn't fully understand it yet, but he felt it, like a draft shifting direction in a closed room. Isabella tugged Colette gently toward the parlor, sensing but not needing guidance. The sound of his steps guided hers like a melody she trusted. They settled near the wide window, where light fell across the rug in a pale gold wash. Colette hesitated only a moment before he drew a breath and began to sing. He chose a familiar Christmas tune, soft and lilting, the kind sung by families around firesides and offered in humble church halls. His voice carried warmth despite its fragility. It wasn't polished, not trained by teachers or shaped by technique, it was human and tender, the kind of voice that carried heart rather than perfection. Isabella leaned closer, her face lifted as if following the sound upward. Her smile grew. She began to sway slightly, tiny rhythmic motions that showed how deeply she felt each note. Then, after a few moments, Colette paused and tapped a beat gently on the wooden table. "Here," he said softly. "Clap with me." Small claps. "Listen." He tapped again. Isabella tilted her head, focused, and lifted her small hands. Her first clap missed the beat, falling a moment too early. She frowned slightly. Colette tapped again, slower this time, letting the sound guide her. She tried once more. This time her clap matched his. She gasped softly, delighted, and tried again. Another perfect clap. Then another. Soon she was keeping steady rhythm, her face glowing with the triumph of rediscovering something she thought she had lost. Cullen watched from the archway, his breath stalled in his chest. He had paid experts around the world to help Isabella reconnect to her environment. He had sat through endless consultations, therapies, and treatments. None of them had sparked the shift he was witnessing now, a small girl finding confidence through sound, a child rediscovering joy in simple beats. His staff noticed as well. The maid paused in the hallway, hand pressed to her heart. The butler, who rarely showed emotion, lingered near the stairs with softened eyes. The atmosphere within the mansion had changed so subtly that it felt like someone had opened a window after years of stale air. Isabella's voice, once faint and hesitant, grew stronger as the minutes passed. Do another," she said, cheeks pink from smiling. Colette obliged. He tapped a slightly faster rhythm. She followed, laughing when one of her claps landed off beat. Cullen felt his throat tighten. This was progress no specialized therapist had managed. He finally stepped into the room. "Colette," he said quietly. The boy looked up quickly, worried he'd done something wrong. "Sir?" Cullen hesitated a moment, sorting his thoughts. "Yesterday, you said you wanted to help her. Why? You could have kept walking." Colette looked at Isabella, who continued to tap the rhythm with delight. Then he lowered his gaze to the rug, voice soft but steady. "I used to have a little sister," he said. "Her name was Eloise. She loved music more than anything. Whenever she was scared or sad, I would sing to her. It always helped her feel safe." He swallowed hard, the memory tightening his voice. "She got sick. It happened fast. The hospitals couldn't save her." A stillness fell across the room. After she was gone, he continued, "I couldn't make sense of the quiet. Singing became the only way I remembered her without breaking apart. So when I saw your daughter, sitting alone, I recognized the feeling. I recognized the stillness. It felt wrong to leave her like that." He lifted his eyes, and Cullen saw sincerity deeper than anything he expected to find in a boy so young. "So I sang." Cullen felt something shift in his chest. The kind of shift that rearranged old beliefs and forced a man to revisit the assumptions he'd built walls around. This was no delinquent. No opportunist. This was a boy who carried grief with a grace he had earned in the hardest ways. Isabella tapped gently on the table. "Colette," she called softly, "is this right?" He turned immediately, voice warm again. "Almost. Try moving your hands like this." He demonstrated, guiding her lightly by describing the motion in words she could follow. Isabella listened with fierce concentration, then mirrored him perfectly. The laughter that burst from her was bright and unburdened. Cullen's eyes stung. He blinked, clearing the blur. The lesson continued. Colette sang another short melody, encouraging Isabella to repeat the rhythm. She began to speak more freely, describing the sound of the fireplace crackling or the faint tick of a distant clock. Each comment was a piece of her slowly returning to the world she'd withdrawn from. When she stood to move toward the window, she paused, unsure of her footing. Colette began humming softly, a gentle guide. She turned her face toward the sound instinctively and took careful steps in its direction. The trust was immediate and complete. She walked with a confidence she had not shown since before the accident. Cullen watched from the doorway, hands clasped together, unable to look away. This boy, this thin, frostbitten stranger, was doing what specialists could not. The hours passed with a tenderness that touched every corner of the room. Isabella laughed fully and freely, a sound so rare the staff exchanged glances of quiet disbelief. Colette laughed with her, a soft, light sound as though he feared too much joy might shatter if released too loudly. By the time the sun began to lower, casting long amber beams across the floor, Isabella leaned back in her chair with a softness Cullen had not seen in over a year. "Come back tomorrow?" she asked, voice hopeful but shy. Colette froze, caught in the hesitation of someone who had never been wanted by anyone other than a lost sister. He glanced at Cullen. Cullen nodded once. "Yes," he said. "Return tomorrow." Something warm flickered in Colette's gaze. "Then I will," he whispered. Isabella laughed again, soft, pure, unguarded. It filled the house like light. And for the first time in a very long time, Cullen Jefferson allowed himself to believe that perhaps, through the fragile voice of a boy who had known too much loss, winter might finally be loosening its grip. For a long moment after Isabella's laughter drifted through the sitting room, Cullen remained standing in the doorway, hands buried in his pockets, unable to move. He had forgotten what that sound felt like, how light it was, how unforced, how free of the heavy strain that had shadowed her every breath since the accident. It had caught him off guard in the gentlest way possible. A father should never be startled by the sound of his own child laughing, yet there he stood, stunned, almost shaken. He replayed the scene in his mind, Isabella leaning toward the sound of Colette's voice as though following a thread only she could feel, her hands clapping carefully in uneven rhythm, her lips curving upward in something pure. Colette had been sitting beside her, guiding her gently, patient in a way money could not hire and training could not replicate. Cullen had watched them from behind the doorway, unseen. He had watched Isabella grow lighter with every note, and he had watched a strange ache bloom inside his own chest, an ache made of equal parts gratitude and fear. Now, hours later, after Colette had gone home and Isabella had been tucked into bed, Cullen stood alone in his study, a glass of water untouched on the desk beside him. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the heating system. His reflection looked back at him from the dark window, a man dressed in expensive fabric but wrapped in exhaustion that could not be tailored away. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He had built empires. He had bought companies, rescued failing markets, broken records, dominated industries. He had faced boardrooms filled with men twice his age and left them speechless. He had commanded negotiations that affected thousands of lives. Power, he understood. Control, he mastered. But when it came to the trembling hands of his daughter, when it came to the way she flinched at silence, when it came to the way she woke up reaching for a mother she couldn't find, he was a billionaire with empty hands. The truth stung every time it surfaced. He sank into his chair and let his head fall back. The ceiling above him blurred for a moment. He blinked rapidly, swallowing the tightness in his throat. It wasn't weakness. It was memory. The accident lived inside him like a wound that had never learned to close. His mind carried him backward without permission. The road had been steep. The snow had been falling in thick sheets, flakes whipping against the windshield as the car tires struggled for grip. He could still hear the crunching grind of packed snow, the subtle skid, the faint shift in balance that told him, in a heartbeat, that something was wrong. He had been driving. Elena, his wife, had been beside him, warm hand resting on his wrist, telling him a story about Isabella humming carols in the back seat during school recess. Cullen had been smiling. He remembered that clearly, smiling at something small, something sweet. And then the car slid. Just a few inches, but enough. The guardrail glinted in the headlights. A curse fought its way past his lips. Elena's hand gripped his arm. The back tires lost traction. The entire world swung sideways, snow exploding around them like white smoke. Isabella's scream cut through the chaos, high and sharp. Cullen had tried to correct the wheel. Too fast. Too slow. Too late. The car spun, hit the embankment, and rolled. He heard Elena shout his name. He heard glass shatter. He heard Isabella cry. And then he heard nothing at all. When he had opened his eyes in the hospital, Isabella had been unconscious. Elena had been gone. He had lived. His daughter had lived. His wife had not. He had asked himself the same question every night since. Why them? Why not me? Guilt was a cold that never thawed. It numbed him from the inside, leaving him with a constant, gnawing fear that Isabella's wounds were his fault, that every tremor in her hands, every moment she hesitated to step into a room, every flash of panic in her eyes, all of it traced back to that night and his failure to protect her. He pressed a palm against his chest now, trying to steady the ache. Billions had rebuilt his companies. Billions had built this mansion. Billions had surrounded his daughter with staff, therapists, specialists. But billions could not reach into her heart. And then a thin boy in torn clothes had walked into his home and done what Cullen, with all his power, could not. Colette Faulkner. Cullen closed his eyes and saw him clearly, the slender frame, the soft brown curls hanging over his forehead, the worn coat too thin for winter, the frostbite darkening the tips of his fingers, the shy but luminous warmth in his eyes. And then, the way Isabella leaned toward his voice, trusting it, seeking it. That trust had not been earned with money. It had been earned with gentleness. Cullen opened his eyes again and stared at his reflection. Why him? He whispered. He didn't mean it bitterly. He meant it honestly. Why had it taken a child from the snow, half frozen and shaking, to reach the daughter of one of the richest men in the country? Why had that voice, untrained but filled with something real, become her anchor? The question hurt, but it freed something in him too. He rose from the desk and walked out of the study. His steps carried him down the hall, through the dim main corridor, and into the kitchen. The staff had retired for the night, leaving the room spotless and quiet. Cullen opened the refrigerator and hesitated. Colette would be back. He had asked him to return tomorrow, and the boy had looked stunned, as though invitations were foreign to him. Cullen wasn't sure how Colette lived, but the clues were there, the thinness of his frame, the way his clothing hung too loosely on his limbs, the cracked skin on his knuckles. The boy was hungry. That much was obvious. Cullen pulled out a small insulated container and filled it with warm stew the staff had prepared earlier. He wrapped fresh bread in foil and added gloves, new ones, thick, insulated, alongside a scarf he had purchased months ago but never used. He set the items on the counter, exhaled, and whispered to no one. This is the least I can do. When morning came, Cullen stood in his usual posture near the wide double doors of the foyer, arms crossed behind his back, gaze fixed on the security monitors. Isabella was in the sitting room with her caretaker, humming softly as she toyed with the corner of her blanket. The melody was uneven but recognizable. Christmas music. Colette's influence. Every morning since the boy's first visit had brought a slight but unmistakable shift in Isabella. She moved with a little more confidence, tilted her head more deliberately toward sounds, reached out more willingly, smiled more often. Cullen felt something loosen in him. A tension he'd mistaken for part of his bones. At precisely 10 minutes past 9, a small shape appeared on the screen outside the gate, thin shoulders, dark curls dusted with snow, hands clasped together nervously. Colette. He stepped closer to the screen, seeing the boy glance up at the mansion with wary eyes. His breath fogged in the icy air. His coat, if it could even be called that, was far too light. Cullen pressed the intercom. Come in. The boy flinched at the sound, then nodded meekly. The gate opened with a low mechanical hum. Colette walked through slowly, the movement of someone unsure whether he truly belonged. His boots left faint prints on the snow-dusted stone path, and his gaze traveled between the towering structure and the steps beneath his feet. When he reached the front door, he hesitated. Cullen acted before the servants could. He opened the door himself. Colette's eyes widened slightly. "Good morning, sir," he murmured. "Come in," Cullen said, voice firmer than intended. Then, softening, "You're welcome here." The boy stepped inside, shivering. Cullen handed him the bundle prepared last night. "For you." Colette blinked. "For me?" "Yes." "Open it." The boy's fingers, reddened, cracked, slowly unwrapped the gloves first. His breath caught. "I can't take these," he whispered. "They're too much." "You need them," Cullen replied gently. "That's reason enough." Colette looked down at the items, jaw tightening in conflict. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Cullen said, and he meant it. "You're helping my daughter." Colette swallowed hard, then nodded once and slipped the gloves on. The relief on his face was immediate and painful to witness. Cullen motioned down the hall. "She's waiting for you." The boy's entire expression brightened. His steps quickened. Cullen followed silently, stopping at the doorway of the sitting room as he had before. The moment Colette hummed the first note of a song, Isabella lifted her head. Her face lit with unmistakable recognition, her hands reaching forward. "Colette." Her voice was small but clear, and the sound nearly broke Cullen. The boy kneeled beside her, smiling gently. "Good morning, Isabella." She giggled, a soft, chiming sound Cullen had once thought he might never hear again. Over the next hour, the sitting room transformed. Colette sang different Christmas melodies, playful, steady, comforting. He guided Isabella's hands to clap in rhythm, letting her feel each beat. Sometimes she missed. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she leaned toward him as though following the vibration of his voice. Cullen watched every second. He noticed the way Isabella's shoulders loosened. The way she began describing the sounds in short, breathy phrases, soft, high, slow, words she'd barely spoken in months. He noticed the boy too. Noticed the care, the patience, the quiet knowledge in his movements. Noticed the pain beneath his smile. During a break between songs, Cullen stepped into the room fully. "Colette," he said, "may I ask, how did you learn to sing like that?" The boy looked at him, hesitant. "My little sister loved music," he answered softly. "She used to beg me to sing her to sleep. I wasn't any good at first. She always laughed at me." Isabella's hand stilled, sensing a shift in tone. "What happened to her?" Cullen asked. Colette's eyes lowered. His throat bobbed. "She passed away," he whispered. "A few winters ago. She got sick. We didn't have much. Singing was all I could do for her in the end." Silence settled over the room. Isabella reached out and gently touched his hand. Colette looked at her, surprised by the gesture. And Cullen? Cullen felt something fracture inside him, something heavy and tightly bound. Two children, one who lost her mother, one who lost his sister, connected by sound. Cullen cleared his throat, voice roughened. "You're welcome here, Colette. Understand that. I won't let anything happen to you." The boy nodded, but uncertainty flickered in his gaze. And that uncertainty only grew in the following days. Because while the mansion was a fortress of warmth and safety, the outside world was restless. Staff whispered. Groundskeepers muttered. Rumors began weaving through the estate like thin strands of smoke. Who's the boy the master keeps bringing in? Why is a stranger visiting the daughter? Is he homeless? Is he dangerous? Cullen shut down conversations when he walked into a room, but whispers had a way of traveling faster than footsteps. He stood at the window one evening, watching Colette's small figure disappear through the swirling snow. The boy hugged the warm meal container to his chest like a treasure. Cullen's jaw tightened. He would not allow suspicion to rip away the one thing helping his daughter reclaim pieces of her life. He would not let anyone harm that fragile possibility. And if he had to stand between Colette and the world to keep that miracle alive, then he would. Silently, firmly, Cullen resolved. He would protect the boy. Even if no one else understood why. Even if the world questioned it. Even if it meant standing alone. Because for the first time since the accident, his daughter had hope. And he would guard that hope with everything he had. The following morning rose with a pale golden glow that stretched across the Jefferson estate like a hesitant blessing. The snow from the night before had settled in soft ridges along the hedges and rooflines, turning everything into a watercolor world of quiet light. Cullen stood by the long windows of the conservatory, coffee cooling untouched in his hand, watching for the boy he hoped would return. He told himself he was only checking on Isabella's progress. He told himself that Colette's presence was temporary. He told himself that he did not rely on this fragile stranger who appeared at his gates with nothing but a voice. He repeated these ideas because believing anything else meant accepting something he was not ready to face. Yet all the logic in the world could not smother the truth that kept rising in him. His daughter was changing. And it had started the moment Colette Faulkner first sang her name. Just as Cullen was preparing himself for the possibility that the boy might not come, a small figure appeared between the trees, emerging from the white morning quiet. Colette approached cautiously, as if afraid the whole world might shift and push him back out. He paused outside the gate, breath rising in faint silver clouds. He wore the same thin coat, the same patched trousers, the same worn shoes that had no business being near snow. His cheeks were flushed from cold, but his eyes, those bright, gentle eyes, held the same quiet hope. Cullen opened the back terrace door. "You came," he said softly. Colette nodded. "You told me to." There was no arrogance in his voice, no assumption. Only simple honesty. It disarmed Cullen the way even his fiercest billion-dollar competitors never could. Inside, Isabella waited in the conservatory, sitting in the large wicker chair she favored for its woven structure that let sound echo differently around her. She tilted her head the moment Colette stepped in. She sensed him before he could even speak. "Good morning, Isabella," he said, voice gentle but bright. Her face lifted. A small smile formed, shy but genuine, and Cullen felt the air shift again. It was the same every time. It was unmistakable. Hope breathed through her. Colette walked toward her slowly so she could track his steps. He hummed softly, a tiny melodic cue he had taught her. Isabella reached her hand toward the sound, stopping just before touching him, waiting for permission. Colette offered his hand, and her fingers closed around his lightly. "Today," he said, "I thought we could try something new." "What is it?" she asked. Her voice was still small, but it carried curiosity now instead of fear. His face brightened. "Walking with sound patterns." Cullen felt his chest tighten. Walking. Not just shuffling or being guided. Walking. The boy explained it to her patiently, in simple rhythms. If I tap twice, that means pause. If I hum low, it means step forward once. If I hum high, it means step to the right. We won't go fast. We only go where you want to go. Isabella nodded with a seriousness far beyond her years. They began inside the conservatory. Colette tapped twice on the stone floor. Isabella paused. He hummed a soft low note. She stepped forward with caution, hands searching the air. Another hum. She stepped again. He moved ahead of her, always staying close enough for her to hear the subtle shift in his breath. Cullen watched, still afraid to breathe himself. Then she took 3 steps without stumbling. 3 steps. Alone. Cullen lowered his head, pressing his lips together to keep emotion contained. The staff moving silently through the adjacent hall paused as well. Even they saw the shift in the girl they had tucked into blankets and coaxed into meals for a year, never expecting this. Colette guided Isabella toward the glass doors leading to the garden. He looked to Cullen for permission. Cullen gave a single nod. Outside, the winter morning wind brushed gently against Isabella's hair. She inhaled deeply, smiling faintly at the cold. Colette changed his rhythm slightly to match the softened crunch of snow. The garden path curved gently around the frozen fountain. It had always been Isabella's favorite place before the accident. Now it seemed determined to become important again. Colette hummed, stepped, hummed again. His voice warmed the icy air. Isabella followed each sound, moving with careful confidence. Cullen stayed several steps behind them, close enough to intervene but far enough not to interfere. Watching felt like witnessing a miracle that refused to announce itself. "Colette," Isabella said after a while, "what does the sky look like today?" He paused, surprised by the question. She rarely asked anything. He turned toward her, voice softening. "It looks like a pale gold blanket. Very soft. It makes everything look gentle." "Is it beautiful?" she asked. Colette hesitated. "It's nice," he said. "But you're probably imagining it better than it really is." She laughed, lightly, shyly, but it was laughter. Cullen's throat tightened. He had not heard that sound in almost a year. The staff at the window held their breath. The whole estate seemed to freeze, as if not wanting to disturb the fragile miracle forming in the snow. When Isabella began to get tired, Colette guided her back to the conservatory bench. Instead of collapsing into silence, her usual response to exertion, she leaned forward. "Will you sing again?" she asked. He nodded. "Anything you want." "Something warm," she whispered. He sang a simple melody first. Then a fuller one. Cullen recognized none of the songs. They were soft, improvised, full of emotion. Isabella swayed with her head tilted, following each note like a familiar star. Cullen sat across the room, observing the quiet scene. He felt admiration rising in him, replacing the anxiety that had lived inside him for months. There was something extraordinary happening, and it had nothing to do with medical breakthroughs or money. It was human. Simple. Honest. As Colette rested his voice, Cullen took the opportunity to ask something that had been lingering in his mind. "Colette," he said softly, "you mentioned once that you sang for someone before. Someone important." The boy looked down, fiddling with the frayed edge of his sleeve. "My little sister," he whispered. Cullen felt the room still. Isabella turned her head toward him, listening. "How old was she?" Cullen asked. 7. Colette swallowed hard. She loved music more than anything. "What happened?" Isabella asked, her voice trembling with empathy. "She got sick," Colette replied quietly. "We didn't have anything. No money. No help. I used to sing for her because it was the only thing I could give her." His voice cracked. "When she died, I stopped singing for a long time. But then sometimes, when someone looked really sad, my voice just started again." Cullen understood now. Colette was not healing others to survive. He was surviving by healing others. Isabella reached out gently toward him. Colette hesitated, then placed his hand near hers. She brushed her fingertips against his knuckles. "I'm glad you sang for me," she whispered. Colette smiled, a soft, almost broken smile. "Me too." Cullen watched this exchange and realized something deeper. This was not coincidence. This was not chance. Colette had come into their lives exactly when he was needed most. When the afternoon grew colder, Cullen approached the boy with quiet gratitude. "You have been walking here every day from outside town?" he asked. Colette nodded. "It isn't far." "It is far in weather like this," Cullen said firmly. "And you don't have gloves. Or proper boots." "I manage," Colette said quickly, almost defensively. Cullen studied him, seeing the truth behind the boy's attempt to sound independent. The thinness of his frame. The worn soles of his shoes. The red marks of frostbite on his fingers. "Colette," Cullen said gently, "I need to know if there is someone you live with." Colette looked away. "I'm on my own." Cullen felt something twist inside him. The thought of this child walking alone through snow while giving everything he had to Isabella filled him with a mixture of protectiveness and guilt. "Then you will not walk home like this," Cullen said. "Wait here." He brought back a pair of warm gloves, a thick scarf, and winter boots that had belonged to one of his teenage nephews during a visit. Colette looked stunned. "I can't take these," he said quietly. "You can," Cullen replied. "And you will. This is not charity. It is respect." Colette hesitated. But Isabella reached toward him again. "Please keep singing for me," she said softly. "Please come back." That was the moment Colette accepted. He put on the boots, the gloves, the scarf. He looked warmer, though still fragile, like a half-frozen flame given room to burn again. Later that evening, as the boy prepared to leave, Cullen walked him to the gate. "Isabella asked if you can come every day," Cullen said. Colette blinked, startled. "If you want me to." "I will." Cullen nodded. "I do." The boy smiled, a rare full smile, bright despite the cold. Then he stepped back into the snowy dusk, footsteps light but uncertain. He paused once, glancing over his shoulder at the glowing windows of the estate. For a brief moment, Cullen wondered if he was looking at the place or at the people inside it. Then Colette Faulkner walked into the night, wondering if he truly belonged here, or if he would someday wake to find it had all been a dream. And Cullen Jefferson watched him go, realizing that the real miracle worker was not wealth, medicine, or technology. It was kindness. Kindness wrapped in the voice of a frostbitten boy who gave everything he had and asked for nothing in return. Cullen stood in the cold, heart uncertain but opening, slowly understanding that whatever role this boy was meant to play, it was only just beginning. Cullen remained on the stone steps long after Colette's thin silhouette vanished beyond the front gate, swallowed again by the drifting snow. The cold pressed against his coat like a reminder of time passing, of decisions waiting, of a life that had begun to shift without his permission. He stood there long enough for the lantern light behind him to flicker gently across the frost forming in his beard. He exhaled once, a slow breath that felt like surrender. Inside, Isabella's laughter, soft, unsure, but unmistakably real, still echoed faintly in the hallways. That sound had pulled him through the darkest months of his life, and tonight, it had been coaxed out by a boy who had nothing except a voice and a heart full of quiet courage. Cullen shut the door and whispered into the empty foyer. "Only just beginning, yes." The next day arrived with a thin winter sun and a hesitant brightness, as though the sky itself wasn't sure it was allowed to shine over the Faulkner mansion again. Isabella woke earlier than usual, her tiny hands fumbling excitedly at the edge of her blanket. "Daddy, is he coming back today?" Her voice still carried the softness of someone who wasn't used to wanting things anymore. Wanting meant hoping, and hoping had been dangerous for her. But today there was something new, expectation. Cullen smoothed her hair, feeling a strange mixture of warmth and ache. "He said he would," he replied. "If he can." Isabella smiled, tiny and tentative, but bright enough to lift something inside him. That was when Cullen realized, a child who looks forward to tomorrow is a child who's healing. Colette approached the gate just after noon, as though testing whether yesterday had been a dream. He still wore the same clothes, thin, frayed sleeves, worn trousers, and shoes that should not have survived a week of winter, let alone a season. But his steps were lighter, more certain, and when he saw Cullen waiting near the door, he stopped as though stunned that he wasn't being turned away. "You really meant it?" Colette asked, his breath fogging in the air. Cullen nodded. "If Isabella wants you here, then you're welcome." Those simple words hit the boy harder than the cold wind. He bowed his head once, a reflex born from gratitude and disbelief, and followed Cullen inside, his footsteps quiet, almost reverent. Isabella heard Colette before she detected his footsteps. His humming drifted into the room first, warm and familiar, and her face lit up instantly. "You came," she whispered, reaching toward the sound. Colette stepped closer, gently placing her small palm against the back of his hand. Their fingers curled in a quiet greeting that had already become theirs. "Yes," he said softly. "I came." There was something unspoken in that exchange, trust forming not by force, but by presence. Cullen stood in the corner, unnoticed, as their strange but beautiful connection deepened. Over the next days, something remarkable began to take shape. Colette, with no training except his own stubborn instinct, crafted a communication rhythm that only he and Isabella truly understood. It started with hand squeezes. A short pulse meant stop, 2 quick ones meant step, and 3 long ones meant I'm here. Then came humming patterns, low notes 4 turn left, higher ones 4 turn right, and a soft rolling vibrato that meant she could keep going. Cullen saw it happening little by little, Isabella anticipating movements she couldn't see, leaning toward the sound instead of shrinking from it, trusting Colette's hands to guide her forward. One afternoon, Colette guided her across the living room rug. Tiny step. Pause. Tiny step. Hum direction. Squeeze. Step. Squeeze. Isabella's breath trembled, not from fear, but from something she almost didn't recognize. Confidence. I'm walking, Daddy, she said, with a delighted gasp. I'm really walking. Cullen swallowed against the pressure in his chest. Yes, he whispered. You are. Cullen watched them from the study doorway later that week, his mind turning with a quiet purpose. He needed to do something. Something for both children. Something that acknowledged how drastically they were changing the air in this house. So he began to plan. A Christmas surprise, one that would give Isabella a sense of wonder she had lost, and give Colette something he had never had. Cullen found himself scribbling notes late into the night, designing a celebration that didn't revolve around extravagance, but around meaning. He folded the page shut when he realized his hands were shaking, not from cold, but from hope. Over time, pieces of Colette's past slipped through the cracks of conversation. It was never dramatic, never exaggerated. His memories came out in quiet moments, when he thought no one was really listening. I had a sister once, he said softly, while guiding Isabella down the hall. She loved music. She used to clap whenever I sang. Isabella, gripping his fingers, whispered, what was her name? Mari. Where is she? Colette hesitated. His voice softened until it was nearly lost. She's gone. Cullen heard it from the doorway and felt something cold run through him, not the winter, but the kind of sorrow that shapes a child too young to bear it. How long have you been alone? Cullen asked gently. Colette stiffened, not used to adults asking questions with softness instead of accusation. A while, he said. Since last year. I survived. People give coins sometimes. Some don't. Isabella squeezed his hand 3 times, their signal for I'm here. Colette looked down at her and smiled for the first time all day. Cullen turned away, giving them privacy, but the boy's words clung to him like frost. That night, Cullen sat by the fire with his laptop open, hands tense above the keyboard. He didn't want to pry. The boy had been nothing but kind. But the world was full of dangers, and whatever Colette had escaped from, or whoever, might not be far behind. He typed slowly, searching for missing children's reports, shelter rosters, any hint of a boy who matched Colette's description. What he found unsettled him, scattered mentions of street children disappearing from public places, rumors of exploitation rings, threads of stories without endings. Cullen leaned back, unsettled. He wasn't just helping a boy now. He was protecting him. The evening before Christmas Eve, Isabella sat with Colette on the rug near the grand piano. She was quiet, not sad, just thinking deeply. Her fingers found Colette's sleeve and tugged gently. Can I make a wish? She asked. Colette glanced at Cullen, then nodded. Of course. She inhaled. I want to walk, without holding anyone's hand. Colette froze. The room went still. Not out of fear, but out of respect for the bravery it took to say such a thing aloud. I don't know if I can make that happen, he said honestly. But I can try. I'll help you try. Isabella's smile trembled with fragile determination. Then I choose that. Cullen pressed his lips together, overwhelmed. His daughter's first real wish in months, and it wasn't for toys or magic or normal childhood things. It was for independence. For herself. From that day on, Colette focused on developing patterns she could follow independently, foot taps, directional hums, soft verbal cues she could memorize. He taught her to feel the changes in floor textures, to count her steps, to orient herself by sound. He wasn't simply helping her walk. He was rebuilding the world around her. One step at a time. Late one night, Cullen stood by the second-floor railing, watching the scene below him. Isabella giggling. Colette humming. Their hands touching in a rhythm all their own. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere in the past few weeks, the mansion had changed. The air was warmer. The halls felt less hollow. His daughter's world was getting bigger again, not because money had bought her new opportunities, but because kindness had reintroduced her to her own courage. And then it struck him with quiet clarity. Colette wasn't a visitor anymore. He was a thread woven into their grief, their healing, their days. A thread of hope in a house that had forgotten how to breathe. Cullen's voice broke the quiet, low, and full of a realization he hadn't allowed himself to say aloud until now. He's become part of our lives. Snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in white, each flake drifting lazily like a whispered promise. The morning light filtered through frost-laced windows, casting a pale, gentle glow across the living room. The air was crisp, tinged with the quiet magic of Christmas Eve, but inside, the warmth came from something far deeper than the fire crackling in the hearth. Cullen sat in his chair, hands resting on his knees, eyes unfocused. The events of the past weeks had left their marks on him, on all of them, but today, there was something different. Today carried a subtle weight of hope, a sense that a long night of fear and despair might finally be giving way to something brighter. Colette stood several steps away from Isabella. The tension between them, once so thick and unyielding, now felt almost fragile, like a thin ice sheet stretching across a frozen pond. Neither spoke at first. Neither moved. They simply existed in the same space, the silence almost sacred, punctuated only by the occasional whisper of wind against the windows. Then, a faint sound reached Isabella's ears. It was tentative, almost shy, but unmistakable, a soft humming. A rhythm she had known all her life, a melody that belonged to Cullen. Her chest tightened as recognition bloomed. Her heart, long burdened with grief and doubt, stirred. He's humming, she whispered to herself, as if saying it out loud might break the spell. The hum grew a fraction louder, careful and deliberate. Cullen's voice, low and steady, wove the familiar tune through the room, filling every corner with something she hadn't realized she had missed so desperately. Isabella's legs trembled beneath her, but something inside her, some fragile thread of trust, urged her forward. She took a step. One. It was enough to shock her into clarity. Her body, still stiff from months of inactivity, protested with every small movement. But the warmth of the voice, the unwavering familiarity, lent her courage. 2. Her breaths came in uneven gasps, fogging the air in front of her. Each step was a battle between fear and hope, yet the music, the soft, steady hum of someone who loved her, carried her onward. 3. The room seemed to shrink and expand at once, narrowing around her feet while opening wide around her heart. Memories of laughter, of moments she had thought lost forever, surfaced and intertwined with the present. The weight she had carried, the guilt, the pain, the endless nights of tears, lifted slightly with each step. 4. Her knees wobbled, threatening to give out, but she pressed on. The hum wrapped around her like a blanket, guiding her through the storm of uncertainty. Each note was a tether, pulling her closer to something she had once feared she would never feel again. 5. She stood firmly on her own, trembling yet triumphant. The distance between herself and Colette seemed insignificant now, as if the snow itself had parted to create a path just for her. Cullen's eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and awe crossing his face. Then, as the realization struck him fully, a dam broke. For the first time since the accident, tears streamed freely down his cheeks. He could no longer hold back the torrent of emotion that had built up, suppressed in the name of strength. His voice caught in his throat as he whispered, almost reverently, "You're walking." Isabella's lips curved into a shaky smile. Her steps had carried her far more than distance, they had carried her past fear, past the shadows that had haunted her mind. She reached Colette, her arms flying around him in a desperate, wordless embrace. Colette's own tears fell unchecked, soaking into the shoulders of the small frame holding him so tightly. He returned the hug with equal fervor, his hands clutching her as if letting go would undo everything the day had achieved. They stood together, two broken halves made whole in a single, miraculous moment. "Cullen," Isabella's voice trembled, thick with emotion. I can't believe I did it." "You did it," he said, voice raw, the hum now replaced by a deep, shuddering sigh. "You've come back to us. His words faltered as tears overtook him again, but the meaning was clear, she had given him something he thought lost forever. Cullen took a step back, still holding her hands, looking into her eyes with a depth of emotion that words could barely capture. "Thank you," he whispered. I don't know how to explain it. You've changed everything. All of our lives. This moment, it's more than I ever hoped for." Colette nodded, tears streaming, cheeks flushed. "It's you, Cullen," she said softly. "It's your patience, your love, your never giving up on her. You've given her the strength to fight back, to trust herself again. And in doing so, you've changed all of us." Isabella squeezed Cullen's hands, feeling the warmth of life and hope pulse through them. The room seemed to shimmer with something intangible yet undeniable. The snow outside continued its quiet descent, but inside, it felt as if the world had shifted, tipping towards something sacred. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their hearts, heavy with grief yet lightened by triumph, communicated more than words ever could. The room, once a place of quiet suffering and unspoken fears, now pulsed with life, love, and possibility. Finally, Cullen pulled them both close, resting his head between theirs, breathing in the scent of warmth, home, and the subtle sharpness of winter air through the open window. "I was lost," he admitted quietly. "I didn't know how to face the days without thinking of what we'd lost. But now," his voice faltered again, but the meaning was unmistakable. "Now, we're here. Together." Colette held him tighter. "Together," she echoed. "No matter what. This is a new beginning, not just for her, but for all of us. We've been given a chance to rewrite the story, Cullen. And you, your heart, your courage, it brought us here." Isabella rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. It was a rhythm she had known for years, one that had sustained her even in the darkest moments. Now, she felt it not as a distant memory but as a living, breathing anchor. "I feel free," she whispered. "I feel like I can, finally, move forward. I can be happy again." Cullen's tears fell onto her hair as he whispered back, "You've always been brave, Isabella. You just needed a reminder. And today, you reminded all of us what's possible." Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and quiet, but inside, the three of them were enveloped in a warmth far stronger than any fire. Their laughter came in small, shaky bursts at first, then deeper, more certain. Their tears mingled, not as sorrow but as proof of survival, of resilience, of love reclaimed. For the first time since the accident, the past felt like a shadow they had walked through but no longer lived under. The room was filled with light, not just from the morning sun or the fire, but from something unbreakable, something that could not be diminished by pain or fear. Cullen looked at them both, voice steadier now, infused with quiet awe. "We've been through hell," he said softly, "but we're here. And somehow, you've both given us, a miracle." Colette smiled, brushing snow from her sleeve, the tears still shining on her cheeks. "Not a miracle," she said gently, "just love. The kind we fight for, the kind we hold on to when everything seems lost. That's what made this happen." Isabella tightened her hold on both of them, feeling a sense of peace she had thought unattainable. "Then let's promise," she said, voice steady now, "that we'll never let it go." Whatever comes, we face it together. Always. Cullen nodded, pulling them both in for one final embrace, the three of them holding onto each other as if the world itself had paused to watch their reunion. Always, he echoed. From now on, nothing will break us. We've seen the darkness, and we've chosen light. The snow continued to drift down outside, silent witnesses to the transformation taking place within. And in that quiet, crystalline moment, Christmas Eve became more than a holiday. It became a testament to survival, to hope, and to the miracle of coming together when the world had once threatened to tear them apart. For Isabella, for Colette, and for Cullen, it was not just the turning point of a single day, but the turning point of their lives. And as they stood together, hearts full, tears mingling with laughter, they knew, with an unspoken certainty, that this was the beginning of something enduring, unshakable, and beautifully alive. The night settled over the town with a quiet hush, snow continuing its gentle descent, layering the streets and rooftops in pristine white. Inside the mansion, laughter and warmth still lingered from the earlier celebration, but Cullen couldn't shake a nagging feeling that pulled him outside. He walked down the long driveway, boots crunching softly in the fresh snow, until he reached the edge of the property. There, huddled near the wrought iron gate, sat Colette. The chill wrapped around him like an invisible hand, but he noticed her first, not the cold, not the snow, but the small figure slumped on the ground, her hands cupping a faint light of some inner hope. She hummed quietly, the sound barely audible over the wind, a fragile rhythm meant to ward off the cold and, perhaps, the world's indifference. Cullen stopped a few steps away, watching her. She seemed so small against the vastness of the evening, so delicate yet stubbornly present. His heart tightened. Something about her vulnerability drew him closer, not as a savior, but as someone who had learned to recognize the quiet cries of a soul waiting to be seen. Colette? His voice was soft, careful, yet carried across the frozen air. She flinched slightly but didn't flee. You shouldn't be out here, she murmured, her eyes cast downward. There was a hesitancy in her tone, a question that hung unspoken. Did he belong here? Could he understand her? I know, he said, kneeling slowly in the snow to meet her at eye level. The cold bit at his fingers and knees, but he didn't notice. But I had to see you. Colette's hand stilled. The hum faded. She looked at him with wary eyes, uncertain, as if expecting the warmth he offered to vanish like a ghost. Cullen took a deep breath, letting the words he had carried in his heart for weeks spill gently into the night. You don't have to stay out here alone, he said. You don't have to carry everything by yourself anymore. I want to offer you something. Her gaze lifted, flickering with the faintest glimmer of hope. Something? She whispered. Yes, he said, reaching slowly toward her, careful not to startle. I want to offer you, his voice softened, each word deliberate, heavy with promise. A home. Colette's lips parted, but no sound came. She blinked rapidly, as though the concept itself was foreign, almost unimaginable. Cullen continued, each word a building block for a future she had only dared to dream of in fragments. Education, he said, his tone steady. You deserve the chance to learn, to grow, to discover your talents without fear. Safety, he added, letting the word hang between them like a shield. No one should have to worry about being hurt, about sleeping cold and hungry. That ends now. A future, he said, eyes locking onto hers. Not just a tomorrow, but a life full of possibilities. Choices that are yours to make. Family, he finished, letting the word settle gently into the crisp night air. A family that loves you, supports you, and believes in you, no matter what. Colette's defenses, long held up against the cruelty of a world that had shown her so little kindness, began to crumble. She dropped her gaze to the snow, but her shoulders shook violently. The tears she had kept bottled inside spilled freely, soaking the gloves she had worn to shield herself from the cold. She sobbed, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the realization that someone had seen her, not just her behavior, not just her survival, but her, and valued her enough to offer everything she had ever wanted. Cullen reached for her hand, warmth radiating through the thick fabric of her mittens. It's okay, he murmured. It's more than okay. You deserve this. Hours later, in the quiet sanctuary of his study, Cullen sat with formal papers laid out before him. The legal protections, the documentation required to make this arrangement binding, seemed both mundane and monumental. Each signature was a promise that no one could ever take her from safety, from the home, from the life that Cullen had just begun to build around her. He signed the papers with a firm, deliberate stroke, each mark a declaration of faith, of hope, and of unshakable commitment. The weight of the pen in his hand felt heavier than any burden he had ever carried, yet lighter than the relief of finally taking action. By the time Isabella heard the news, the house was quiet, yet alive with anticipation. She entered the study with eyes wide, the familiar sparkle of determination in her gaze. "Cullen," she said breathlessly, "we have to celebrate. She has to join us for Christmas dinner. She belongs here. She is family." The words resonated in Cullen's chest, echoing with a certainty that made the previous week's fears fade. "Yes," he said, standing and extending a hand to the door. "Tonight, she joins us. Tonight, she sees the family she deserves." The evening transformed the mansion into a flurry of laughter, music, and the scent of pine. The tree, grand and regal, awaited their touch. Cullen and Isabella moved with practiced grace, setting up the ornaments while Colette watched, hesitant at first, yet gradually allowing herself to become part of the ritual. Each ornament became a small bridge between past and present. Colette reached out tentatively, brushing her fingers over a delicate glass bauble. "This one," she whispered, "it feels like a little star." "Exactly," Isabella said gently, guiding Colette's hands. "Its shape is round and smooth, and see the red swirl? That's like firelight dancing." Colette's eyes widened as she followed Isabella's descriptions, feeling the subtle ridges and curves, the faint bumps and patterns. "And this one?" she asked, lifting another ornament, a tiny bell carved from wood. "That one's warm, like music you can hold in your hand," Isabella said, smiling. "Can you hear it in your fingers?" Together, they decorated the tree, Colette learning to trust her touch, her perception, and her place in a space that had been foreign and intimidating only hours before. Cullen watched silently, his heart swelling with something tender and unspoken, the sight of them both laughing quietly as they hung the final ornaments imprinting itself into memory. When the last ornament was placed, the trio stood back and admired their work. The tree glowed softly, the lights reflecting in the frosted windows and bouncing off the ornaments like tiny suns. The room, once cold and imposing in its size, now felt intimate, full of shared warmth and newly forged bonds. Cullen reached for Colette's hand, letting it rest lightly in his. "This," he said softly, "is more than a tree. It's more than lights and decorations. It's all of us, together. A home isn't just walls and a roof. It's this. Being seen, being valued, and knowing you belong." Colette's tears had returned, this time not from fear or doubt, but from a deep, sustaining sense of acceptance. She looked at Cullen, at Isabella, and finally at herself, and for the first time in her life, she felt the profound relief of being fully recognized. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling but clear. "For seeing me. For choosing me." Isabella reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Colette's face. "We didn't choose you," she said gently. "We found you. And now, you're ours, just as much as we are yours." Cullen pulled her into a hug, the three of them forming a circle of warmth, love, and protection that no cold night could penetrate. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the mansion held an unshakable peace. They were together, and that was enough. In that simple yet profound moment, with snow falling silently around the mansion and the Christmas tree casting soft, golden light across their faces, the boy who had once been alone discovered what it truly meant to belong. He discovered home, not just a place, but a feeling, a promise, a family that would carry him through life's storms. And as they stood there, hands intertwined, hearts open, and eyes shining with tears and laughter alike, the world seemed to pause, bearing witness to a miracle that was neither sudden nor magical, but earned, tender, and enduring. Cullen, Colette, and Isabella, bound by love, choice, and the courage to trust each other, had created a moment that would linger forever, a symbol of unity, hope, and the enduring power of being truly seen. Snow swirled lightly outside the grand windows of the mansion, but inside, warmth radiated from every corner. The hearth glowed softly, casting a golden hue across the polished floors and walls lined with memories of past holidays and family gatherings. For the first time in months, the house felt truly alive, not just with sound, but with heart. Isabella moved with steady grace across the living room. The short distances she had once struggled to traverse alone now felt effortless, each step a testament to resilience and hope. She paused mid-stride, looked toward Cullen, and smiled, a radiant, unburdened smile that illuminated the space around her. Cullen watched from his chair, his hands resting loosely in his lap. The ache in his chest softened as he observed her independence, the small but meaningful strides she now took without hesitation. Every careful movement, every confident step, reminded him how fragile yet powerful life could be, how love could heal wounds that seemed insurmountable. Colette slept quietly in the room down the hall, a warm, safe bed beneath her and thick blankets around her shoulders. The fear of the streets, the uncertainty of the cold, the loneliness she had carried like a second skin, all of it had vanished, replaced by the security of belonging. Cullen had watched her retreat behind closed doors each night, only to emerge the next morning with a spark of life in her eyes that no hardship could extinguish. Now, she rested, finally at peace. The transformation of the mansion mirrored the transformation within its walls. Staff who had once been distant, hesitant to intervene in personal matters, now moved with gentle respect toward Colette. She was no longer just a guest or a ward, she was part of the family. The cook had left extra biscuits on her tray without prompting, the gardener had hung ornaments in her corner of the room, and even the housekeeper's stern expression softened whenever she passed. The unspoken acknowledgement of her place in the household created a harmony that had once been impossible to imagine. Cullen's gaze shifted between the two children. Isabella, confident and curious, touched the edge of the armchair before moving on, feeling the textures around her with the practiced patience she had learned from Colette. And Colette, once fragile and wary, now exuded quiet strength, the kind that came from being truly seen and valued. Cullen realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that his life had changed irrevocably. He leaned back in his chair, letting the firelight play across his face, and thought about love, its quiet persistence, its radical ability to heal and transform. He thought about kindness, the small, deliberate acts that could become miracles in the lives of those who had almost given up hope. And he thought about the true spirit of the season, not as a single day marked by gifts and decoration, but as a living, breathing practice of generosity, compassion, and the courage to open one's heart to the unexpected. Isabella's voice broke his reverie. "Colette," she called softly, "will you sing one last Christmas lullaby?" Colette, seated near the tree and draped in a blanket of soft wool, looked up with a shy smile. Her hands clasped the edges of her blanket as though drawing courage from its warmth. She began to hum, softly at first, a gentle melody that seemed to float effortlessly in the golden glow of the room. Each note carried tenderness and history, a quiet story of resilience, of nights survived and mornings reclaimed. Isabella's fingers hovered in the air, touching nothing, yet feeling everything. The vibrations of Colette's voice translated into something tactile, something that connected with her deeply. She smiled widely, moving slightly with the rhythm, her eyes closed as if the music itself were guiding her. Cullen moved toward them, his steps slow, careful, mindful of the magic unfolding before him. When he reached the children, he bent slightly to wrap his arms around both of them, a gentle embrace that was firm yet protective. Colette leaned into him, and Isabella nestled closer, her head brushing his chest. The three of them sat in silence, letting the warmth of their union, the soft music, and the glow of the tree fill the room. The ornaments shimmered in the firelight, each one a small reflection of joy, hope, and the journey they had endured together. Colette's song carried through the room, and Cullen let himself absorb every moment, the courage of a child, the beauty of a soul reclaimed, and the quiet power of family forged through empathy and care. As the final notes of the lullaby faded into the crackling of the fire, the room was still, save for the steady rhythm of their breathing. Cullen looked down at the children, feeling the weight of gratitude pressed gently against his chest. He realized then that miracles did not always announce themselves with grand gestures. Sometimes, they arrived quietly, through the hearts of the most unexpected people, through a child's song, a whispered promise, a small act of care that changed lives forever. "Thank you," he said quietly, not needing to specify for whom. His words carried to both children, enveloping them in the same warmth that had built their lives anew. Colette blinked, a few tears escaping, not of fear or sadness but of pure, unfiltered acceptance. She understood now what it meant to belong, what it meant to be seen, to be valued, to be loved without condition. Isabella reached over, brushing a loose strand of hair from Colette's face, and whispered, "You're home now. And we're all together." Cullen kissed the tops of their heads, holding them a moment longer. The realization that he had been given more than he could have imagined, a family, a sense of purpose, and the quiet magic of true connection, filled him with a profound serenity. The household staff, who had been watching from a respectful distance, now felt the weight of the moment. They moved quietly, almost reverently, respecting the space, the bond, and the new family that had been created before their eyes. In the kitchen, the cook wiped tears from her cheek. In the hall, the housekeeper smiled softly, silently acknowledging the child who had come from nowhere to claim a place in their hearts. Outside, the snow continued to fall, layering the world in white, but inside, it was warm and alive. Each flicker of the tree lights, each soft hum of the children, each sigh and embrace, became part of a tapestry that would endure long after the holiday ended. Cullen's mind wandered one last time before he allowed himself to relax completely. He thought of the long path that had brought them here, the struggles, the uncertainties, the fear that had once threatened to overwhelm them. And yet, here they were, whole, connected, and deeply, undeniably alive. He understood now that the spirit of Christmas was not about the gifts wrapped in paper or the lights strung along the eaves. It was about the courage to love, the bravery to trust, and the willingness to open one's heart to the improbable miracle that could appear in the most unexpected forms. Colette's voice rose again, softly, singing the last notes of her lullaby. Isabella reached out instinctively, touching the air as though she could hold the music in her fingers. Cullen wrapped his arms more firmly around both children, feeling the steady pulse of life, safety, and belonging. They were together. They were complete. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe in miracles, not the kind promised in stories, but the kind that grew slowly, quietly, and relentlessly, in hearts that refused to give up. The warmth of the room, the glow of the tree, and the soft, steady hum of Colette's lullaby created a moment suspended in time. In that suspended moment, they understood something profound. The world could be harsh and unpredictable, but love, real, deliberate, chosen love, could create sanctuaries, heal old wounds, and nurture hope where it had almost faded. Cullen pressed a gentle kiss to Colette's head, his lips lingering as if trying to seal the promise he had made. "You're safe," he whispered. "You're loved. And you always will be." Isabella leaned into him, her small hand in his, her eyes sparkling with certainty. "We're together," she said. "No matter what. Always." Outside, the wind continued to swirl the snowflakes in delicate patterns, but inside the mansion, no cold could touch them. Their hearts were full, their lives forever changed, and their bonds unbreakable. The children had found a home, and Cullen had found the true meaning of family, of love, and of the quiet, enduring miracle that happens when one opens their heart to the impossible. And in that warm, glowing room, with the tree casting soft light across faces alight with hope and joy, a simple truth settled into the heart of every soul present: miracles do not always come in grand, dazzling forms. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, from the most unexpected hearts, transforming ordinary nights into extraordinary beginnings. That Christmas, a new kind of light filled the mansion. It was not only the twinkle of ornaments or the glow of the hearth. It was the light of belonging, of trust, of love reclaimed. It was the light of a family forged not by blood, but by courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that even the most broken hearts could be made whole. And as the soft hum of Colette's lullaby mingled with the gentle crackle of the fire, Cullen, Isabella, and Colette sat together, wrapped in warmth, hope, and certainty. Their eyes met briefly, and without a word, they understood, this was their miracle, born not of magic, but of love. And it would carry them forward, always.